Imagine a photo from February 2026 in Milan. Alysa Liu stands on Olympic ice, gold shining, arena. Lights gleam off the metal. Her father is in the crowd, weeping. The cameras lock on him. Social media goes wild instantly. But look closer at that image, and you will see something else. A glaring absence. No mother in sight. Not next to her, not behind her, not cheering. That detail did not spark a controversy. It did not trend, but it stayed there quietly. For longtime fans, that old, silent question came back. Who raised her? The answer is far from simple. And it did not start in 2005 when she was born in Clovis. It began decades ago. Arthur Liu's life was harsh. He fled China after the chaos of Tiananmen Square back in 1989. He built a new life in America alone. No network, no help, just pure grit and a stubborn resolve. He eventually became an immigration lawyer in California. Stable and focused. This part is key. Men who survive like that do not do anything halfway. By the early 2000s, Arthur knew what he wanted. Children. He did not wait for a perfect marriage. He chose solo fatherhood. 5 kids, all born through anonymous donors and gestational surrogacy. Alysa arrived August 8, 2005. Then came Selena, and triplets, Joshua, Justin, Ian, and Julia. One father, no public biological mother. This is usually where people start talking about surrogacy. But that technical talk misses the real point, because biology is not why people keep asking about her mother. They are reacting to a specific image, a single dad at the rink, always there, loud and dominant in the figure skating world. He called himself a single father. The interviews confirmed it. Media loved that story. It was clean, inspiring, and very easy to sell. But life at home was not a one-man show. When Alysa was born, Arthur was actually married to Yoning Xian, known as Mary. She was the kid's legal guardian and kept that role even after they divorced. That is not just a formal title. No, legal. Guardianship means real work, paperwork, and actual daily responsibility. Yet in most news, Mary appears once and then vanishes from the public record. Silence does not mean she was not there. Sometimes it just means the story preferred a simpler hero. There was also another woman mentioned in older reports. Arthur's mother, Alysa's grandmother. She moved from China to California to help raise 5 children. Just try to picture that home. 5 kids, dawn practices, carpools, school, and a father building a busy legal career. Someone had to keep things running. Someone had to cook, clean, and keep the peace. Grandma eventually went back to China when Alysa turned 13, just as her skating career took off. Moments like that change a teenager in ways the world never sees. This is where things get deep. Alysa never felt like she was missing out. In interviews, she seems calm and happy to talk about her family. She once mentioned that her father was totally honest about her birth story when she was only 8. There were no secrets. Honesty in families built this way is everything. Kids usually struggle more with lies than with unconventional lives. But none of this answers the big question from that Olympic podium photo. Where is her mother? Maybe we should ask why we need one. Face to represent motherhood. In Alysa's world, that role is shared. Genetics from a donor, birth from a surrogate, legal care from Mary, daily love from her grandmother. The camera's only focused on her father, showing just one piece of the puzzle. It is not a scandal, but it is complex. And the sport itself brought in even more maternal figures as she grew. When a 5-year-old wakes up at dawn to skate, her coaches become her emotional foundation too. That rarely gets called motherhood. But honestly, maybe it should. Let's pause, because the deeper we go, the less this looks like a missing piece. It looks like a carefully built, unique life, and every design has a purpose. Flashback to 2013 at the Oakland Ice Center. Outside, it is still pitch black. 5:12 a.m. The rink's digital clock glows under fluorescent lights. That freezing air hits your lungs differently. Before sunrise, 8-year-old Alysa is there. Blades too big. Helmet hair. Skinny arms. Cranking out jumps while other kids are sleeping. High in the stands, her father watches. Cameras catch that part later. But they miss the rest. The carpools, the grind, the chaos, siblings rushing for school. Those messy mornings when someone stayed home because a kid had the flu. Arthur was there, but he could not be everywhere at once. Usually, the story gets simplified. The narrative says a single dad made it work. But making it work takes infrastructure. Mary Yang Qingxin remained legally tied to the children even after the divorce. That detail is not flashy. It is not dramatic, but it is precise. Legal guardianship for 5 kids implies real continuity. Court papers are boring. They do not trend, but they anchor reality. There is a big difference. Being absent from interviews is not being absent from a child's life. Then there is Shu. Arthur's mother moved from China to California to help raise them. She was a constant presence. She stayed until Alysa was 13. That number matters. 13 is when adolescence starts to pull. Identity stretches. Friends matter more. Doubt creeps in. Just as Alysa's name was rising in headlines, that stabilizing figure moved back to China. Nobody made a big deal about her departure. It just happened. But timing and childhood rarely go unnoticed inside. Now, zoom out a bit. Figure skating is expensive. Industry estimates say elite training can cost $20,000 to $50,000. That is before travel, choreography, and costumes are factored in, all while 4 other kids were growing up in that same house. Money aside, time is the more valuable currency. Arthur drove and managed it all. He coordinated, negotiated coaching, and handled logistics. But a home does not run on logistics alone. Laundry needs doing. Dinner has to appear. Someone must ask about homework and absorb the emotional overflow. After a bad practice. Motherhood is not always at the rink. It is in the kitchen too. That part is rarely televised. Alysa dominated the United States Championships, landing triple axels as a teen, the youngest 2019 champion. The media loved the prodigy narrative. Young, fearless, historic. They ignored complexity. Complex stories slow down highlight reels. But now, here is something that shifts the whole perspective. In June 2022, Alysa walked away from competitive skating. She was only 16 years old. Her statement said she was simply done. She wanted a normal life, school, and the things she missed. That is not a child raised in chaos. That is self-awareness. She enrolled at UCLA. She studied psychology and even climbed to Everest Base Camp with friends during her break. Not metaphorically, literally. She posted photos from Nepal. Those 2 years were not tied to a schedule. It was personal time. And during that period, something very interesting happened to her public tone. She softened. Not weaker, but more self-directed and more like a real person. Less prodigy, more human. When she returned to skating, she did it entirely on her own terms. That kind of self-possession does not come from instability. It grows from a place of security, even if that security looked untraditional. Here is the deeper layer most people miss. Alysa never complained. She never expressed resentment about her birth story. She spoke about learning the truth at age 8. She was not shocked. Reports say she actually suspected the truth about her family already. Kids are perceptive. They notice physical differences and ask questions. It is all about the delivery. Transparency creates grounding. Secrecy creates a fracture. Nothing in her public interviews signals that break. There is still something unresolved in how the public sees her. People focus on Arthur's intensity, his voice in the stands, his visible pride. It is all very cinematic. But Mary and Shu, they are not cinematic. Quiet people rarely are. That creates an imbalance in how we perceive things. No footage gets interpreted as no influence. That is not accurate. The sport itself complicates motherhood. As Alysa rose through the junior ranks, strong female coaches finally entered the picture. Coaches become the emotional anchors in elite youth sports. They see the fear and vulnerability. They catch the tears after falls. This caregiving isn't biological, but it builds incredible resilience. Alysa's success did not happen in a vacuum. It was built in layers, inside a household that functioned unconventionally, led by a father shaped by political exile and strategic thinking, alongside siblings in that same structure who chose different paths. And yet, the question still remains about that Olympic photo. No mother. Maybe the framing is flawed. Maybe the camera just looked the wrong way. We haven't even touched the deeper psychological layers yet. Yeah, the ones hidden beneath identity and media hype. That is where things get much more nuanced. There is something people won't say aloud about Alysa Liu's mother. They aren't just asking who gave birth to her. They are asking if something was missing. That is the subtext here. A teenage skater dominating a brutal sport while her father stands by, intense and totally relentless. Somewhere in that image, people look for balance, a soft counterweight or a visible maternal presence. But balance isn't always standing there in photographs. Sometimes it is absorbed early and quietly. Alysa was born August 8, 2005 in California. By the time she was 5, she was skating seriously in Oakland. That trajectory doesn't happen by accident. It takes structure, routine, and commitment. It also takes emotional control. Elite figure skating is not forgiving. I mean, falls hurt. Scoring is harsh. Teen girls are judged constantly. If her foundation was weak, it would have shown. Instead, people always noticed her composure. She was calm under pressure. Even as a 13-year-old landing triple axels at the 2019 U.S. Championships, she did not look frantic. She did not look desperate. She looked steady. That is interesting because children who feel fundamentally unwanted tend to carry tension. They search for validation. Alysa does not project that. Arthur Liu chose Caucasian egg donors, and he has acknowledged that publicly. He wanted his children to be biracial, Chinese and white, growing up in America. That decision is rarely examined with care. It wasn't random or accidental. It suggests deep planning, identity, and a long-term strategy. Planning, identity, strategy, it was all by design. The timing matters too. Early 2000s America, post 9/11, immigration debates were heating up. Arthur wasn't just having kids, he was building a future. It is almost like high-stakes architecture. Architecture reveals a world view. He survived political chaos and rebuilt in another country. He became an immigration lawyer, then designed his family intentionally. This wasn't chaotic, it was deliberate. Every choice was made with a purpose. Now it gets quiet. Mary, the legal guardian, avoids cameras. No emotional interviews or reflective commentary. That absence of a narrative voice has allowed the public to simplify things. But silence is often protective. Families involving divorce and surrogacy often agree to keep their lives private, especially when one child becomes famous. The skating world is not gentle with complex stories. Clean stories sell. The single father and his prodigy daughter, it fits the mold perfectly. Yet, early reports mentioned her grandmother Xu lived with them before returning to China. That happened when Alysa was 13, just before the spotlight got brighter. You have to wonder what emotional shift that required. No dramatic quotes exist. No public breakdowns, just performance. Now, jump to 2022. Alysa retires at 16. That timing shocked people more than her jumps ever did. She had just competed in the Beijing Olympics that year. She looked great, finished strong, and then she walked away. She said she was simply done. She wanted a normal life. That carries weight. Top athletes don't usually quit at their peak, unless something feels wrong. But what is striking is what she didn't say. She did not complain. She did not blame. Strikingly, she didn't say much at all. She didn't blame her father. There was no resentment about her upbringing. She didn't frame her. childhood as a forced sacrifice. Instead, she called it a choice. Then she enrolled at UCLA, studied psychology, found life outside skating, and trekked to Everest Base Camp in 2023. Climbing that mountain wasn't just symbolic, it was real. It showed physical confidence outside the rink environment. During those 2 years away, her posture and way of speaking changed subtly. She was less guarded, noticeably warmer. That didn't come from finding a mother. It came from a growing sense of self. Here's the catch. We expect kids from anonymous egg donations to feel lost or confused. But Alysa's public presence tells a different story. Maybe honesty worked, or maybe the foundation at her home, however unique it was solid enough that biology never felt like a missing piece of the puzzle. Perhaps we've been defining motherhood too narrowly. There's another huge factor we haven't looked at yet: culture. Alysa grew up in a Chinese-American home with a father forged by exile and a grandmother who crossed the world for her family. That environment had clear values, discipline, endurance, and high standards. Plus, she was biracial, which added layers. Growing up in California, in a sport historically dominated by white athletes, that identity is complex. Complexity builds resilience, but you can't see that in a quick Olympic broadcast clip. By the time she returned to the ice and stood at the 2026 Olympics, she wasn't a girl searching for something. She was whole. But that sense of wholeness doesn't just happen. It's earned. And that process involved many more people than the cameras ever showed. Now, look closer at how society reacts when families don't follow the rules. That reaction reveals more about us than it does about her. There's a reason this specific question keeps coming up. It's not because the truth is hidden. It's really not. Alysa Liu was born through an anonymous egg donor and a gestational surrogate. Her father, Arthur Liu, raised her and her 4 siblings in Northern California. Mary stayed their legal guardian after the divorce, and grandmother Shu lived with them for years. None of this is a secret. So why does the question remain? Because people aren't confused by the science. They're reacting to a missing narrative. Look back at Milan, February 2026, gold medal, the bright lights, Arthur crying in the crowd. It's a perfect movie moment. But clean stories often ignore the messy truth. The narrative became, devoted single father builds a champion. That only explains a small part of the story. There's a massive gap between what's visible and what's actually foundational. In American sports media, parent stories usually get squeezed into simple archetypes: the stage dad, the soccer mom, the pusher, the supporter. These roles are easy to sell. Unique family structures don't fit that mold. There's no easy camera angle for communal motherhood. No single face to zoom in on. Without that focal point, we assume something is missing, but shared care is still care. Look at the timeline. In 2019, Alysa became the youngest champion in decades, just 13 years old. The spotlight got brighter. The pressure rose. This was right when the conversation about athlete mental health finally started to break into the mainstream. Simone Biles would change everything 2 years later in Tokyo, and the national talk around pressure was already shifting. Alysa grew up right at that turning point. She hit peak fame before mental health awareness was normalized. She walked away in 2022. It wasn't an accident. It was a statement. She lived in an era where young athletes finally started claiming their own agency. When she retired at 16, it wasn't a rebellion or a breakdown. It was pure autonomy. And that kind of strength doesn't come from neglect. It comes from security. It is subtle. Arthur's path: exiled from China after Tiananmen Square, then rebuilding in the United States. Getting a law degree in immigration shows resilience through structure. That world view definitely shaped their home. Rules and discipline are great, but structure alone cannot create emotional stability. It can lead to pressure, compliance, or even a fracture. But Alysa doesn't look broken. She is someone who can just walk away, climb mountains, and then jump back in. That strength suggests a stable foundation was built early on. Maybe it was Mary's quiet support back then. Or Shu's daily food, routines, and familiar rhythm. Maybe being honest about her birth story at age 8 helped her. Or maybe her UCLA friends helped her find an identity beyond skating. Honestly, it was likely all of it. Things get messy when people ask, who is her real mother? That question assumes there is only one. But her story is complex. Genetics from a donor. A surrogate carried her. There were legal roles for Mary. Her grandmother raised her daily. And even her coaches became emotional anchors during her teens, with her culture layered over every part of it. That is not a void. It is a village. But a village is hard to narrate. It won't fit a headline or a single tearful close-up. So, the media kept it simple. Fans followed that easy story while the truth stayed off-screen. There is another awkward layer here. 2. We are still getting used to assisted reproduction, things like surrogacy and donor conception. These stories challenge old ideas of motherhood and family. Even in 2026, there is a hidden bias that says motherhood is only about biology and being seen. Alysa's story breaks that mold easily. She isn't bothered by it, but we often are. And final piece, the one that won't resolve neatly. When she stood on that Olympic podium, cameras caught the joy and her father's tears. But a community of care is hard to photograph. It builds internal grit. It creates a young woman who can quit competing at 16 and return stronger. She does not define her life by what other people think she is missing. Maybe that is the real beauty here. She didn't lack a mother. Her experience of motherhood just didn't need a spotlight to work. And here is the most telling detail. She never actually seemed to be looking for something missing. She was building her life from a secure place. This doesn't answer every question, but it reframes them. Think back to that famous Olympic image. Did you see a void? Or are you realizing just how many people were actually there, even if the cameras missed them? If you have followed Alysa Liu's journey closely for years, I'm curious. Did you feel like something was missing? Or was the story just different than what we usually see? Tell me in the comments. If you like digging much deeper than the headlines, subscribe.